I feel farming can be the solution to the environment problems, global warming. I feel that we may be getting a bad name, but I think we could do so much more to mitigate the carbon, and I just hope that it's not too late.
Instinctively, as a farmer, we tend to think about looking after the soil first and foremost, because we look after the soil will look after us.
The world's soil contains double the carbon that's in the atmosphere and 3 times the carbon that's in all growing plants. So how we manage that soil as farmers is going to determine whether it sequesters carbon or emits carbon.
Our members have a huge ambition to tackle climate change because, well, we're at the forefront of it. Weather is our biggest either ally or enemy, depending what they say on a Sunday in Countryfile with the weather coming up. So
we're in a really good area to help mitigate this. There's a lot of forestry. Most of the area is grassland, so it's a really good sink for carbon. And most folk in this area are fairly extensive, so we're not using loads of artificial fertilisers and stuff like that.
The climate is hugely important, and if we can help to alleviate the challenges in the future, then we have to take steps. What these steps are, every member will have different views. If you look at what seems to be the fashion just now of regenerative agriculture or agroecology or holistic management, Scotland has been wearing those badges since day dot, because that's what we do. We grow grass, we feed that grass to cows or sheep or pigs. They then deposit what's left of that after producing a hugely valuable, rich protein food back into the land to cycle back and create that carbon cycle again.
We've got a great environment for the wildlife, so that is a big part of how we work in this area, I would say. So all those kind of wildlife areas are areas that should be soaking up carbon and really doing their bit to help keep the environment right.
So this farm, this is a hill farm, and it's a peat bog basically. So we do grazing management specifically to improve the biodiversity and the carbon sequestration ability of the peat bog. So the cattle reduce the dominance of the blowgrass, which allows sphagnum moss to grow, and then it self-compresses under its own weight, which builds peat, and that is carbon sequestration at work. Very nice, simple system.
For the last 20 years, this soil has not been cultivated more deeper than a few inches. I went down that road because this is not necessarily the most productive land. You can see it's shallow and stony, and I had to control production costs. And by giving up ploughing and deep cultivations, I cut my fuel bill by between half and a third. I now use about 30 litres a hectare of fuel in a growing season. Before I used between 70 and 90, depending on the year. So I knew those savings were coming. What I wasn't expecting was the improvements in soil health that you see after about 5 or 6 years. I'm now using 60% of the fertiliser that I used to use, bought-in fertiliser that I used to use, and getting the same yields. The moss stops the soil heating up too much and losing moisture in periods of dry sunshine. It also helps absorb moisture during periods of heavy rainfall, and this land now has an organic matter that's about double what it was 20 years ago. The problem with ploughing land is that it exposes more of the soil to the atmosphere, and that causes oxidation of the carbon that's in the soil. Carbon is generally in the form of organic matter, so you're losing organic matter, which is the glue that holds your soil together and provides the nutrients and water holding capacity.
Here we produce milk for Isla Foods, the largest European food cooperative, and I would say they are the most forward-thinking milk or food company that works within Scotland in regards to climate biodiversity. We do a carbon audit every year with a huge amount of paperwork, but also we're scored against each other. So not how we operate, but the outcomes of how we operate are all measured, whether that's cow lameness, cow health, calf health, antibiotic use, the biodiversity gain on our farm. So every year we have to do something else for biodiversity.
The role of government in supporting farmers to mitigate climate change is really significant. They have a big role to start with in leadership, in exploring what needs to be done, providing education, and kick-starting the process or pump-starting the process so that farmers are rewarded for carbon sequestration, reducing emissions, and providing other public goods such as biodiversity and improvements to the environment.
I think the government could help us by providing schemes that would make it more beneficial to grow, to plant trees, to do flower meadows again. Simple things that would make it worth our while actually doing. A lot of the things that would help probably aren't as economic, shall we say. So to get schemes that'll help us actually bring those things to fruition and then to keep it going along would be excellent.
That's the role of government. The government has to be there to reward us, or pay, or incentivize us to do these things. Because if we're solely market based, of which some industries are, if you look at pigs, poultry, and in some cases dairy, we are solely market focused. But if you solely rely on the market, we become a commodity. It's price that drives it, and if you drive solely on price, you end up becoming hugely destructive to the environment, because farmers are businesses, they need to make money, and if the way of making money is to clear hedgerows and plough up ground and intensify, then they'll do it, because we're here to make a living, we're here to support families. It's not because we don't understand the damage we're doing, it's because, well, if we're not doing that, we can't make money and we're not here at all.
The government tend to view land use in silos, so they look at forestry and then they look at agriculture. It doesn't necessarily need to be that way. I'd be quite happy to have a more integrated view to forestry and agriculture.
In future, instead of government providing support to farmers, private enterprise, investment capital through the carbon markets can support farmers for carbon sequestration. And I believe that in the future we will also see trading platforms and markets develop that allow private enterprise to pay farmers for improving biodiversity and other public goods. Government will always have a role to regulate those markets and ensure that a transition to a green economy is a just and fair transition for all of the population.
I think we have an ambition to improve and change, and that change is going to be driven by the carbon agenda and the policies, but we're in a huge policy gap, specifically in Scotland.
In Scotland, I don't really know where we are in terms of policy. I get the impression that the Scottish Government are trying to align themselves to EU ideology, but we've left the EU, and similarly they don't seem to be going down the ELMS route either, like they're doing in England. So at the moment, I as a farmer feel like there's the Scottish political element, there's the British political element, and then there's the European political element, and we're in a vacuum in the middle.
And my fear is that government policy will focus too much on carbon and not enough on the wider environment. And we're already seeing an effect of that in the forestry policy, which is which has been driven by the carbon argument to plant more and more Sitka spruce trees. But the environmental
negative environmental effects of that are really significant and don't seem to be taken into account.
So this land drains into the Tarf, which goes into the River Bladnoch, and well, the sphagnum moss, as we showed you earlier, you pick it up and you squeeze it, even if it feels dry to your hand, you squeeze it, and the amount of water it holds is quite something. So it mitigates flooding, simple as that. Whereas if that land were to be planted in commercial forestry, the moss disappears from underneath it. The runoff just goes straight, especially once they clear fell. They clear fell a forest, and if there's no moss and other life in that forest floor, it's acidified, and the runoff just goes straight into the river, kills the fish. That's what stops the river flooding.
I feel kind of battered at the moment. We seem to be getting the blame for everything, but it's just, well, I suppose we've taken it for so long, it'll just keep on going again. We just do what we do, and we love doing it, so you just go out and you do the same as you did yesterday or whatever, the same as you did last year. But if we could maybe get a wee bit of help and change things, we could do so much for good for the country.
There will be changes. We need efficiency is the number one. The more efficient you can become, so reducing bottom inputs, all those leaks from that carbon cycle. So if you're buying synthetic fertiliser or you're leaching nitrogen from your slurry into rivers, or that's a loss from that carbon cycle. Those are the things we need to focus on. If we can get those leaks shored up and plugged, then Scottish agriculture is well on its way to becoming not just carbon neutral, it's hugely carbon negative. But we've got to change. We've got to tell that story. I think that story doesn't get told.
Very little we can do in the grand scheme of things, other than what we can do inside our own businesses and on the land that we control. Probably what we can do is try and impact policy making decisions with government. Try and encourage them to listen to what we're saying.
All it takes is a change in farming practices, and we see sequestration of carbon into soils. And as soon as that becomes government policy, or the market develops that allows farmers to easily benefit from the carbon they're sequestering, then I think farmers will become far more engaged with the climate change debate and put more thought into how not only they can benefit from it, but they can improve the wider environment in which we live in.
Just to leave the land better than when I started farming. And I would say that's probably true of every farmer.
See, we're just custodians in our time here, so it's just a matter of keeping it right for the next time, the next generation.
I think it's quite an exciting prospect ahead of us. Things are going to have to change, and change is always exciting. So.